Grief has a way of showing you who people really are. When my wife died, I thought the worst part would be the loneliness, the empty bed, the silences at the dinner table, the questions from my daughter that I didn't know how to answer. I never imagined that the people who would twist the knife the deepest wouldn't be strangers or even friends who drifted away. It would be my own parents. She passed away suddenly. Car accident. One of those phone calls you never forget, the ones that rearrange your entire life in a single sentence. I was at work, my daughter was at school, and within an hour, everything I thought I knew about stability was gone. The days after felt like walking through molasses, picking out a casket, deciding between burial and cremation, explaining death to a 9-year-old who still thought her mom was going to walk through the door. And through all of that, I kept waiting for my parents to step in, to be the grandparents my little girl desperately needed, to be the parents I thought I still had. They didn't. When I called to tell them the funeral date, my mom's first response wasn't, "I'm so sorry," or "We'll be there." She sighed and said, "Oh, honey, that's the same weekend your brother's girlfriend is moving in. We promised to help." I thought I misheard. "You mean you'll come after? Or maybe just to the service? It's your daughter-in-law's funeral." "No," she said firmly. "We can't be in two places at once. And this is important. It's a big step for your brother." I swear, for a second, the grief gave way to pure rage. My wife was gone, and they were comparing her funeral to moving boxes into my brother's house. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The funeral came. Friends, coworkers, neighbors all showed up. People who barely knew her still came to pay respects. But my parents? Empty seats where they should have been. My daughter asked me quietly, "Where's Grandma and Grandpa?" And I had to choke down the truth. I just said, "They couldn't make it." She frowned, but didn't press. She was too busy holding on to me like I might disappear too. A week later, while I was still trying to remember how to breathe in this new version of my life, I saw it on Facebook. A photo of my parents, grinning ear to ear, standing next to my brother and his new girlfriend, holding a stupid little sign that said, "Welcome to the family." The caption read, "So happy to have a new daughter." A new daughter, while my actual wife, their actual daughter-in-law, was in the ground less than 7 days. That was the first real fracture. The first time I thought, maybe I don't have parents anymore. But it didn't stop there. Fast forward to my daughter's 10th birthday. I worked like hell to make it special. I couldn't give her the mom she deserved, but I could give her a day filled with love. I decorated the backyard with streamers, rented one of those bounce houses, invited her friends from school. She was smiling, laughing. It felt like the first time I'd seen that kind of light in her face since the accident. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for my parents to pull up. I had told them the date weeks before. My daughter kept asking, "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa are coming?" They didn't. Instead, later that night, I saw another post online. My brother again. This time it was a puppy shower for his dog. I didn't even know that was a thing. They threw an actual party because his dog had puppies. And there were my parents, front and center, cooing over dogs, while my daughter sat on the porch swing at dusk and whispered, "I guess they forgot." When I finally confronted my dad about it, his words burned into me. "At least his dog has pedigree. What do you have? A broken home." I can't even describe the silence that followed. I just stared at him, wondering how a father could say that to a son who was raising a grieving child by himself. But the final straw came when I asked them for something so small, so reasonable. My daughter was struggling. Nightmares, anxiety, crying spells that left her shaking. Her school counselor suggested therapy, and I knew she needed it. But money was tight. I was covering everything alone, working long hours, still paying off hospital bills from the accident. So I swallowed my pride and asked my parents if they could help with the counseling fees. My mom didn't hesitate. "Why waste money on a child who won't remember therapy anyway? Kids forget. She'll get over it." Something inside me froze. That was the moment I knew they were gone to me. Not dead, but gone. Because no loving grandparent could dismiss a child's pain like that. I walked out of their house that day and didn't look back. For the next year, I poured everything I had into my daughter. Double shifts, sleepless nights, every spare dime into her counseling and her happiness. And slowly, she started to heal. She smiled more. She laughed more. She started to talk about her mom without breaking down. Meanwhile, I started thinking about the future, about what kind of world I wanted her to grow up in. And when I looked at my bank account and saw the inheritance my grandparents had left me, Money my parents always assumed would circle back to them someday. I knew exactly what I was going to do. When my grandparents passed, they left me an inheritance. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to matter. Around $180,000 split between savings bonds, a life insurance payout, and some property they sold before they died. My parents never said it out loud, but it was obvious they thought the money would orbit back to them eventually. They saw me as a placeholder, not as someone capable of making decisions on my own. For years, I didn't touch it. I worked jobs, lived modestly, and let it sit there, earning a little interest. My wife and I used to joke that maybe one day we'd blow it on a beach house or some ridiculous vacation when we were old. But after she died, the money stopped feeling like a future dream. It started feeling like a responsibility. I'd look at my daughter, curled up on the couch with her stuffed unicorn, staring at the TV, but not really watching, and I'd think, she deserves more than this. She deserves security. She deserves to know she's safe, even if the people who should have been her safety net abandoned her. That's when I contacted a financial advisor. I sat in his office with my folders and my grief, and I told him I wanted to set up a trust for my daughter. Something airtight. Something that couldn't be touched by anyone but her. He nodded, took notes, and said, "You want to make sure she's taken care of no matter what happens to you." Exactly. The process took a few months, but by the end of it, I had a trust fund set up in my daughter's name. The money wasn't going to me, and it damn sure wasn't going back to my parents. It was for her future, therapy, education, a down payment on her first home, whatever she needed to stand on her own 2 feet someday. And it was locked in such a way that no one could guilt her into handing it over. Not me, not my brother, not anyone. The first time I told my parents about it was almost accidental. My mom called, not out of concern, but to ask if I could help out with my brother's expenses. Apparently, he and his girlfriend were trying to buy a bigger house because, as she put it, they're building a family and families need space. You understand. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at a sink full of dishes, exhausted from another double shift, and I just laughed. Not a happy laugh. One of those sharp, bitter ones that catches in your throat. "You want me to give him money?" I said flatly. "Well, you've always been good with saving," she said, her voice all syrupy. "You don't really need all of it. It would mean so much to your brother. He's carrying the family legacy now." That phrase, family legacy, it was like gasoline on fire. So I told her. I set up a trust. Every dime from grandma and grandpa is locked away for my daughter. None of it is for me. And absolutely none of it is for you or him. Silence. For a second, I thought she hung up. Then came the outrage. "You did what?" she snapped. "That money was supposed to stay in the family. You can't just cut us out like that." "Funny," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "Because when I asked you to help me pay for therapy for your granddaughter, you told me not to waste money. So I guess I learned from you. I don't waste money on people who don't care about my child." She sputtered. She tried guilt, anger, even tears. I didn't budge. Word spread quickly. My dad called me a selfish bastard who was spitting on everything his parents built. My brother sent a string of texts, ranging from "you owe me" to "we're family, don't be an asshole" to "you're ruining everything for us." For once, I didn't explain myself. I didn't try to justify. I just stopped answering. That year, Christmas came and went without them. It hurt, I won't lie. Watching my daughter open presents without grandparents there felt like another loss piled on top of the one we already had. But at the same time, there was relief. No more waiting for them to show up and disappoint her. No more excuses. Just us, building something honest and small but real. Then came the kicker. A few months later, my parents showed up at my door. Not together, separately. First my dad, red-faced and blustery, demanding I be reasonable. Then my mom, softer, trying to play the victim. Both of them said the same thing in different ways. I should reconsider the trust. I should think of the family. Translation, think of us. Think of your brother. I looked at them, really looked, and it hit me. They weren't here because they cared about my daughter's future. They were here because they were afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of losing access to money they thought they were entitled to. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in front of them. I didn't feel like the overlooked son or the broken home they pitted. I felt powerful, not because I had money, but because I finally understood the truth. Their approval wasn't worth anything. I told them, calmly, that the trust was untouchable, that my daughter would grow up knowing she mattered, even if her grandparents couldn't see it, and that as far as I was concerned, their part in our lives was over. My dad exploded. My mom cried. I closed the door. That night, I sat with my daughter on the couch, watching some silly Disney movie, and when she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" I finally had the strength to answer honestly. "Yes, baby," I said. "We're going to be more than okay." And for the first time since the funeral, I actually believed it. After I shut the door on my parents, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally get the message. That they'd stop trying to wedge themselves into my life only when it suited them. That they'd leave me and my daughter in peace. I underestimated how entitled people can get when they believe they've been cheated out of something they think belongs to them. The first few weeks were quiet, almost unnervingly so. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. I was half convinced they were ignoring me out of spite, which I could have lived with. But then, little things started happening. First, my brother sent me an email, long, rambling, full of self-pity and veiled insults. He said I was destroying the family name by hoarding money that should have been used to keep everyone afloat. He said I'd let grief turn me bitter and that my wife would have wanted me to be more forgiving. That last line hit hard. He weaponized her memory, someone he barely acknowledged when she was alive, to manipulate me. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling my stomach churn, before I deleted the message without responding. Then, my mom started reaching out through my daughter. She sent birthday cards, not addressed to me, but directly to her. Inside the envelope, there would be some note about how daddy is keeping us apart, or how family is more important than money. My daughter was 10, old enough to read, old enough to feel conflicted. She brought one of the letters to me one night, her little hands shaking, asking, "Did I do something wrong? Why is Grandma mad at you?" That broke me. I wanted to rip the letter to shreds and scream, but instead, I sat down with her and explained. I told her it wasn't her fault. That grown-ups sometimes act selfish when they don't get what they want. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't trash talk my parents either. I needed her to know the truth without feeling like she had to pick sides. The escalation didn't stop there. My dad cornered me in the parking lot of my work one evening. He must have waited until my shift ended, because I walked out, bone-tired, and there he was leaning against his car like he had every right to be there. He started in immediately, raising his voice about how disgraceful I was, how I was choosing money over blood. When I told him to leave, he sneered. "You think that kid's gonna thank you when she grows up alone, without a family?" That cut deeper than he realized. Because in the darkest moments, I had that fear too. Was I robbing her of something by cutting my parents out? Was she missing out on the big, messy family gatherings, the cousins, the grandparents, the so-called legacy? But then I remembered the puppy shower, the funeral they skipped, the way they dismissed her need for therapy. What kind of family was I depriving her of? One that didn't value her existence? No, I wasn't taking anything away. I was protecting her from the constant rejection I grew up with. I told him point blank, "If you keep harassing me, I'll get a restraining order." He scoffed like I was bluffing, but the look in my eyes must have convinced him I wasn't. He got in his car and peeled out of the lot. My hands were shaking the whole drive home, but my resolve was steady. I wasn't backing down. What I didn't expect was how my daughter's friends' parents started catching wind of the drama. Small-town grapevine is a dangerous thing. At one of her soccer practices, a mom approached me and said, "I heard your folks are upset with you about some inheritance thing." They came up in conversation at the store. I felt humiliated. My private decision, something meant to safeguard my daughter's future, had turned into gossip fodder. It made me want to crawl out of my own skin. But then this mom added, "Honestly, good for you. I cut my own parents off years ago. Sometimes you gotta do what's right for your kid, not for appearances." That small piece of solidarity meant the world to me. It reminded me that I wasn't insane, that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. My parents, however, weren't done. They tried one last desperate move. They reached out to my daughter's school counselor. I only found out because the counselor called me in for a meeting. She told me, gently, that my parents had called the office claiming they were concerned about my daughter's well-being, suggesting that maybe she wasn't getting the support she needed at home. I saw red. It was an underhanded attempt to paint me as unfit, to wedge themselves in by implying I was neglecting my own child. Luckily, the counselor knew me and my daughter well enough to see through it. She said she just wanted me to be aware in case the harassment continued. I walked out of that meeting shaking with fury, but also proud. Proud that I'd already taken steps to protect my daughter's mental health. I had her in therapy. I had her in activities. I was present. Everything they had failed to do for me, I was doing for her. That night, I sat down and had a long talk with my daughter. I told her, gently but clearly, that her grandparents might try to confuse her or make her think she was caught in the middle. I told her none of it was her fault, that she was loved unconditionally. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe and whispered, "I only need you, Daddy." That was the moment I knew. I'd made the right choice. No matter how much they tried to twist things, no matter how many guilt trips or manipulations they threw my way, I was standing on solid ground. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something better. And the irony? The more they clawed and scrambled, the more people around us began to see the truth. The golden sun image of my brother started to crack. The loving grandparents' facade started to crumble. Every desperate stunt they pulled just exposed how selfish they really were. They thought they were rewriting the narrative to make me the villain. But in reality, all they did was prove why I had to walk away. The weeks after the counselor meeting were tense. My parents didn't back down. They escalated in subtle but invasive ways. Texts, emails, even letters addressed to my daughter. Sometimes they sent gifts with notes that read more like barbed critiques than presents. A personalized pencil set with "Don't be lazy like your dad" scrawled on the side. A children's book about being grateful for your family that felt like a passive-aggressive instruction manual. One evening, I returned home to find a pile of mail at the door. My stomach sank as I recognized the familiar handwriting, Mom's. I carried it inside carefully, placing it on the counter, and sat down. The letter was long, dense with guilt tripping and subtle blame. Lines like, "We only ever wanted to help you. You're punishing your daughter for your own stubbornness." And "Family is forever, even when you think it's not," stared up at me. I could feel the old anger bubbling, the familiar mix of hurt and frustration from my childhood when every word from them carried the weight of judgment. I could have crumpled it, or I could have thrown it in the trash, but instead, I sat with it. I let myself feel the emotion, the years of being dismissed, belittled, and ignored, all bubbling to the surface. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't anticipated. The next day, I had to pick my daughter up from school. She was quiet in the car, staring out the window. I knew immediately something was wrong. "Did Grandma or Grandpa say something to you today?" I asked gently. She shook her head, but I could see the worry etched in her expression. "It's just, I don't understand why they keep trying to make me feel bad," she said softly. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel. "Sweetheart, they're not trying to teach you lessons or make things right. They're trying to control how you feel because they don't like that we're standing up for ourselves. It's not your fault, and you don't have to listen to them." Her little face relaxed slightly, but I could see the relief she felt in having that validation. It struck me again how much of my own childhood trauma I was now protecting her from. I realized that for the first time, I was truly breaking the cycle. No longer would she endure what I did. No longer would she be manipulated to feel less than she was. Things came to a head when my parents showed up unannounced at my daughter's school during parent-teacher night. I had half expected they'd try something, but nothing prepared me for the audacity. They arrived, claiming they were here to support her education, and tried to push their way into conversations with teachers. I watched from a distance as the principal politely asked them to wait outside until we could speak, explaining that only legal guardians were allowed in that context. The look of shock and outrage on their faces was almost satisfying. Almost. But it didn't stop there. They called my daughter afterward, leaving voicemails that dripped with guilt and manipulation. I deleted them without her hearing a single word. That night, we talked at length about boundaries, trust, and self-respect. She started to understand not just my choices, but why I had to make them. "They just want to boss us around," she said, a line so simple yet profound. Meanwhile, I had started implementing long-term safeguards. The trust I'd set up for her was fully operational, with funds designated for her education and well-being, and absolutely no access for my parents. I updated the beneficiary information on our joint accounts, installed additional security measures on all financial documents, and even changed the mailing addresses for anything sensitive. Every precaution I had previously taken became an impenetrable shield, ensuring that no matter how clever they got, They could not manipulate or access what was rightfully hers and mine. Weeks turned into months, and their attempts dwindled. Every call I ignored, every visit I denied, every text I left unread reinforced a new reality. My daughter and I were a unit, self-sufficient and secure. The shift in power was subtle but undeniable. I wasn't just defending against them anymore. I was thriving despite them. And that, perhaps more than anything, felt like victory. During this time, my daughter blossomed. She no longer flinched at family mentions or felt ashamed of her situation. She was excelling at school, developing hobbies, making friends, and even began to display a level of emotional intelligence I hadn't seen at her age before. She asked questions, challenged opinions, and most importantly, she trusted her own judgment. Watching her confidence grow was its own kind of quiet revenge, not against my parents, but against the cycle of neglect and favoritism they'd created. Then came the moment that cemented everything. One Saturday, we decided to host a small birthday party for her with just her closest friends and their families. I invited no extended family. My parents didn't find out until the day of the party when neighbors texted them photos. I got a handful of furious calls, followed by a flood of texts, all full of outrage and entitlement. But I didn't answer. I watched from inside as my daughter laughed, unburdened, surrounded by love that mattered. It was the first time in years I felt completely free from their judgment. I realized something crucial. The power they had wielded over me wasn't in their words or their actions, but in the space I allowed them to occupy in my life. Once I reclaimed that space, once I prioritized my daughter and myself, their attempts to control us became powerless. By the time the night ended, my daughter hugged me and whispered, "This was the best birthday ever. I don't care about them." I felt a lump in my throat. She didn't need them. She had everything that mattered right there: laughter, love, and security. And for the first time, I truly believed that maybe, just maybe, I could have it too. The weeks following the birthday party were strangely calm. My parents' attempts to interfere gradually dwindled, though I suspect it was less about change on their part and more about me standing firm. I didn't respond to calls or emails unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only in ways that set firm boundaries. There was no yelling, no dramatics, just quiet, controlled detachment. The silence itself became a statement. I remember one particular morning when I walked into my daughter's school for a parent-teacher meeting. The principal greeted me warmly, introducing me to several teachers who had noticed her academic and emotional progress. One of them mentioned how mature and confident she had become, asking how I managed to support her so effectively. I didn't mention my parents or the drama. I simply smiled and said, "She's remarkable on her own. I just make sure she knows it." And it hit me then how much of my own strength had been built in parallel to hers. Protecting her had forced me to reclaim myself, piece by piece. We started planning little milestones, weekend trips, art classes, community events, things that gave us both joy and built our life together. I noticed a subtle change in how my daughter viewed the world. She was learning resilience, independence, and the power of standing up for oneself. Every time she faced a challenge at school or with friends, she approached it confidently, knowing she had my unwavering support. I realized I had achieved more than just protection. I had instilled values she would carry into adulthood. Months later, I received a cryptic email from my parents. It was filled with vague apologies, half-hearted explanations, and a hint of guilt. They had discovered that I had fully cut them out of financial decisions regarding my daughter and myself. Normally, this would have sparked frustration or even glee at their expense. But I found myself indifferent. There was no joy in their remorse, only a deep satisfaction that I had ensured the stability of our lives without relying on their recognition. The lesson they had never taught me: they could no longer control us. I decided it was time to reflect. I pulled out journals I had kept during the early months of this battle, the hurt, the anger, the careful strategies for protecting my daughter. Reading them, I realized how far we'd come. My daughter, once timid and uncertain, was now bold, confident, and thriving. I had transformed from a reactive, defensive parent into a proactive, strategic one. The distance from my parents wasn't just physical or emotional, it was empowering. One evening, we had a quiet dinner at home. My daughter sat across from me, animatedly talking about her day. I looked at her, really looked, and felt a wave of pride and relief. "You know," she said suddenly, I'm glad we don't let anyone make us feel small anymore. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her that she had saved me as much as I had saved her, that her resilience gave me courage. Instead, I nodded and said, "Me too, kiddo. Me too." There were moments of reflection, of course. Memories of my childhood, being dismissed, ignored, and undermined, still surfaced. But instead of bitterness, I found clarity. Those experiences had shaped me, yes, but they no longer defined me. I had reclaimed agency, built security, and modeled strength for the next generation. The past was a teacher, not a jailer. Then came the ultimate test of control, the family reunion that my parents had proudly announced weeks prior. I received the invitation, but it was just for them. I knew better than to show up. Instead, I took my daughter to a local festival, something entirely ours. That day, seeing her laugh, fully engaged with the world and free from their influence, I realized the depth of what we'd achieved. We didn't need acknowledgement from the people who had once dismissed us. We had built our own recognition, our own joy, our own family. In the weeks that followed, I documented everything: the trust fund, the legal protections, the strategies we had used to ensure independence. Not out of spite, but as a blueprint for resilience, a record that could guide her if needed in the future. I wanted her to understand not just the victories, but the careful planning and discipline it took to reclaim our lives. It was a form of education, perhaps more valuable than any lesson her grandparents could have offered. I started to think about forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. Forgiving didn't mean reconciling or allowing them back in. It meant releasing the emotional burden. I could acknowledge the hurt, understand their flaws, and still choose peace. And slowly, the resentment that had fueled my actions transformed into quiet satisfaction, a serene pride in knowing we had not just survived, but thrived. By the time my daughter's next birthday rolled around, I had fully embraced this new reality. We celebrated with our close friends, no extended family, just love and laughter. When she looked at me, beaming, I realized I had given her more than material security. I had given her autonomy, dignity, and the freedom to grow without fear of dismissal or belittlement. And in that moment, I finally understood the ultimate lesson. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't in proving someone wrong, it's in proving yourself right. Years later, when my parents tried to reach out, their messages were polite but empty. They wanted acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. I responded once, succinctly, "We are thriving. You are not a part of it." That was the end of it. I felt no regret, only a deep, steady contentment. Our lives were ours, fully and irreversibly. Looking back, I realized the greatest gift I could have given my daughter and myself was the affirmation that we are enough, that our worth isn't determined by approval, favoritism, or inherited authority. That true family is built not by blood alone, but by love, respect, and trust. My parents may have chosen to ignore us, to diminish us, but we chose ourselves. And that choice, quiet, deliberate, and unwavering, made all the difference. I finally understood what I had been striving for all these years. Not revenge in the traditional sense, not vindication in the eyes of others, but the quiet, profound triumph of building a life where we belong, respected and safe. My daughter's laughter, her confidence, and her joy were the ultimate proof. And for the first time, I slept at night knowing that we were free, truly free, from the weight of their judgment.